Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to West Sussex Record Office. My name is Wendy Walker and I'm the County Archivist. It's great to welcome so many of you here tonight and also to welcome those of you who are joining us from home. Tonight we're going to be helping to celebrate. You can't hear. Is that better?
No. Is it on?
Is that better? Technical issue, there you are, turn it on. This year we're celebrating 100 years of libraries in West Sussex. And tonight we have with us in the audience, Emily King, our Executive Director of Communities, and Leslie Sim, former Head of Libraries, and my boss when I first joined West Sussex. So, quick word of housekeeping before we begin. If the fire alarm goes off, it will be real. We aren't expecting anything else. So the fire exits are immediately to my right there, or back down through reception, depending on where you are in the building. At the end of the talk, we're going to be serving refreshments in reception. And there's a display of documents that some of you will have seen already as you came through the search room. If I could just ask you not to bring any of your drinks and biscuits into the search room, because documents and drinks don't mix. Our speakers will be taking questions at the end of the evening. For those of you who are joining us from home, if you'd like to put your questions into the chat box, we will pick those up at the end of the talk. We'll be recording this talk and it will go up on our YouTube channel very shortly. So for those of you who want to see it over again, I want to recommend it to friends and family. You'll be able to do so. And if you go onto our YouTube channel, you'll also be able to see some of our previous talks. Quick reminder of our forthcoming events, those of you who might have sat on a leaflet or two. On Tuesday, the 29th of April, we've got Alan Green with us, who'll be telling us about the history of Oakland's Park in Chichester and Freeman's Fairground. And then on Sussex Day, the 16th of June, we'll be joining forces with Screen Archive South East to launch our next episode of West Sussex Unwrapped, which will be about West Sussex and the home front during World War II. And we'll be bringing together the archives from the Record Office together with film footage from Screen Archive South East. I think many of you joining us tonight will have a deep and abiding love for and commitment to libraries, either as members of staff, as ex-members of staff, supporters, users, or a combination of all of these. I think I myself was that proverbial child who rushed up the steps on a Saturday morning of the Civic Centre building to pick my 4 books for the week ahead. Libraries opened up a whole new world for me. And fed my imagination. And I can still remember the excitement of finding a book that I haven't read by one of my favourite authors, and that stays with you. Our speakers tonight need little introduction. Both have devoted their working lives to public libraries and made a huge contribution to West Sussex and beyond. Indeed, I think both of them have West Sussex libraries in their DNA, and I think if they were a stick of rock and you opened them up, it would say West Sussex Public Libraries with a label on saying, if lost, please return to West Sussex County Council. Martin Hayes was first appointed, was the first county local studies librarian for West Sussex when he was appointed in 1986. He undertook pioneering work really in raising the profile of local studies and the importance of heritage to local communities. He was recognised with an Honorary Fellowship of the Library Professional Body CILIP in 2017. And latterly, I had the privilege of sharing an office with him until he retired in 2023. Russell Allen is the Head of Libraries and Heritage and my current boss, and leads the library service across West Sussex. He began his library career at the age of 16 as a Saturday assistant at Angmering Library, I think, and has been involved with libraries ever since, and particularly with many of the most recent developments in the service. And in 2015, he too was awarded a CILIP award as Public Librarian of the Year. Now in its 100th year, West Sussex Library Service has evolved from its earliest beginnings in village centres to 6 days a week across 36 libraries across the county. We now welcome Martin and Russell to tell us more about this fascinating history. I'll pass it over to them.
Thank you very much, Wendy, and good evening, everybody. Ooh, no pressure. Now, cast your minds back to the year 2000. I was involved quite heavily in the 75th anniversary, which was very exciting. We produced this amazing booklet here. And I did a lot of work in a 1920s talk, but I comforted myself I wouldn't have to do a talk for the centenary. That didn't go to plan. So here I am. The joking part, I had to do a lot of research. Luckily, I've been retired 2 years, Wendy said, and I hope you'll enjoy as much as I have done the discoveries that I've made. And there's a lot I didn't know about the library, so I shall get those over to you. I discovered a natural order for the talk. The library service evolved slightly differently from 1925 through each decade. So each decade has a sort of theme that emerged naturally and key individuals to focus on. So that's the approach that I will have tonight to make it rather more interesting than a simple load of statistics and buildings being thrown up. I'll cover the first 75 years up to the year 2000 or so. And this is what you're going to get, as it were. I'll be doing each decade. You can see roughly what we're going to work on, decade by decade, with a special section on the wall as well. And Russell will bring the story home, covering the 21st century library service, both current and, I think, probably a look to the future. So, public libraries. They first appear after Parliament passed an Act in 1850 allowing municipal boroughs to establish them. A series of acts followed, culminating in the 1919 Libraries Act, which permitted county councils to establish them for the first time, where none existed, which is a key phrase. So, as you can see in this image from a County Council minute book, on the 13th of February 1925, councillors voted to adopt the new Act and put a scheme forward, to accept a scheme put forward by the Education Committee, which was to administer the new service. West Sussex was among the last county councils to adopt the Act, rather slow, but as you'll see, we certainly made up for it later. So a key phrase in the Act was where none existed. And in West Sussex, in 1925, there were already 2 public libraries in existence. Worthing Borough opened the very first one in 1896 in the old West Worthing Commissioners Building in Rowlands Road. It's the photograph, top row, in the middle, next to Marion. Thanks entirely due to the drive and initiative of the amazing Marion Frost, Worthing's first chief librarian, a new library was funded, designed and built in Chapel Road. That's the one top right. And this happened in 1908. She was probably the first female head of a library service in Britain and introduced innovative concepts and was admired nationally. Meanwhile, in 1906, the Littlehampton Urban District Council had opened the first purpose-built library in our county. And this building is still in use today, thanks to several refurbishments and an extension. So, let's now look at the new county library scheme. Just 2 months after the Act was approved, the first county librarian was appointed in April 1925. Here he is on the left, Henry Allen Twort, aged 37. Henry was from Croydon, and by 1911 he'd taken a job as a library assistant in the town's magnificent central library, which you can see in the middle. He took exams to become a professional librarian, was encouraged and promoted by William Berwick Sayers, the chief librarian, with an international reputation. Now, Berwick Sayers' groundbreaking ideas were to have a huge influence on this young librarian and a big effect on West Sussex libraries as they emerged. He particularly set up libraries in the community, in schools, in hospitals, in other buildings. He also encouraged Henry to work with the Central Lending Library for Students, which later became the British Library Lending Division, and also to get involved actively with the Workers' Education Association, both locally and nationally. He thrived at Croydon such that in 1923, he was able to secure the Deputy Chief Librarian's post at Fulham Borough Libraries. His experience of adult education and senior management must have influenced the County Council's Education Committee, which appointed him. And have a look at the article in the top middle. There were 46 applications and 5 people interviewed, so he'd done very well to actually be chosen from this very strong list. So how was the new service to be set up? Twort started work on the 11th of May, tweaked some details of the draft scheme already in place, and here we see 2 pages from the final version in July. As you can see from the 26 sections on the left, the detailed planning was impressive. But let's think about the huge task facing Twort. The whole service was to cost no more than £800 a year, of which £300 was the county librarian's salary. Now, there were 3 main aims. 1, create 50 library centres in the first year. Those are the towns and villages marked with a cross in the list on the right, with another 60 created the next year, and more until every village with suitable premises had a library. Second aim was to hold a public meeting in each place to elect a local library committee and an honorary librarian, decide the opening hours and the location of the library. The third aim was to buy 15,000 books in year 1 for the whole county, equivalent to 1 book between 10 people in West Sussex. So, early days. Now, for the first 5 years, Twort may have had the title county librarian, but a more accurate term would have been only librarian. He was the only professional librarian in the entire organisation. Let's consider the task facing him. He needed to set up and run a service for 150,000 people, the population of West Sussex that were applicable, from 2 basement rooms in this tiny terraced house, 46 Westgate in Chichester. The initial book stock of 50,000 books needed to be stored here somewhere. And he was supported by just a couple of clerical assistants. He clearly worked under a great deal of pressure, charged with working almost single-handedly, creating a county-wide service, setting up public meetings in 50 towns and villages in a period when most people did not have a telephone. You can only imagine how tough that was. It gets worse. Henry was a single parent. His wife Florence had died in 1923, very young, in her 30s, leaving him to look after 2 children, now aged 9 and 5, starting this new job. And to cap it all, he had congenital heart condition causing regular bouts of ill health. So a really tough start to his time here. Details of the new scheme were published in the August 1925 local newspapers, inviting people to organise a public meeting. This is how he was going to get details of the scheme over. Simultaneously, vicars of the larger parishes on the list and the Urban District Council clerks were sent letters about the scheme. The County Times was dismissive, reporting that only a dozen replies had been received. But these were early days. Despite the pessimism of the County Times, there was a flurry of public meetings across the county, attended by Twort himself, everyone. The first places agreeing to host a library were, from left to right on our slide up there, Midhurst at their meeting on the 17th of September, followed by Feltham near Bognor 4 days later, Arundel in late September, then Warburton and Horsham in early October. They get the prizes for most enthusiastic towns and villages. Indeed, not only did Midhurst have the first meeting, but it also, move you on to. Indeed, Midhurst had the honour of opening the very first county library at 7 o'clock on Saturday, the 17th of October, 1925, housed in a room in this building, the Vicarage, thanks to the Reverend Frank Tatchell. And within 90 minutes, 2/3 of the books have been borrowed. It was open twice a week on Saturday evenings and on Wednesday afternoons, just 2.5 hours a week. Just think about that. We complain about the opening hours in the moments. You might just about be able to see in the article that this historic event was slightly overshadowed by the exciting prospect of electricity arriving in Midhurst. Now, the library rules, bottom right, meant the books could only be borrowed by local people. The loan period was 14 days, and there was a fine of a 1 old penny per week for any late returns. Infectious disease was a serious problem in this pre-antibiotic period, so any contaminated books were to be given to the medical officer of health. So let's have a look at some of the other places, some of the village centres as they were called. To clarify, no new purpose-built libraries were constructed for over 30 years in this first phase of the library scheme. They were all set up in an existing building while the activities in that building carried on. From left to right, we see Southwick Village Centre. The top picture is the National School, with that tiny building in the distance being the library or part of the library. And then below it was the old Seamen's Mission that he transferred to a few years later in Albion Street. In a few parishes, reading rooms had already been built, so most of these agreed to join the new county scheme, such as Washington. Also, Rudgwick villagers had already created an earlier library in the village hall, and they simply donated their books to the scheme. Similarly, the Cocking building was originally a turnpike toll cottage, converted to a men's reading room. Unusually, the Petworth Institute, top right, I think, housed not only a county library, but also an independent rival library. And they had 1,000 volumes for the Institute members compared to the county's 40 books. A bit unfair, if you ask me, unfair rivalry, but it worked out okay because there's still a public library in Petworth, and I'm not sure about the Institute. Perhaps someone from Petworth can come and tell me whether the Institute is still there, and if it's still got a library, actually, I'd be surprised. Thank you also to the Record Office, actually, for this photograph from the brilliant previous collection. So everything was very small scale, as you can see, with often the library being in part of a corridor in a building or part of a room being made available. The books were housed in locked cupboards because of the short opening hours with shelves in them, or locked transport boxes if no cupboard was available. The smaller libraries had just 40 volumes on the whole, and even the large ones like Horsham and Spogner only had around about 400. So again, very, very small scale. Now, how did Twort get the books out? Because not only was he a county librarian, he was the van driver. He organised the service. He did absolutely everything in those early years. So the library van. They were transported to each centre in wooden boxes by this 800 weight Morris standard van, supplied by Wadham Brothers of Southgate in Chichester. This cheaper 12 horsepower Morris was chosen in preference to a 23 horsepower Ford, so twice the capacity, which meant that the van struggled to get up hills. And I'm sure that didn't go down well with Mr. Twort, to say the least. Thank you again to the Record Office for supplying the photograph and also the vehicle licensing record. And actually, you'll be able to see these photographs and another photograph as well with the licensing record in the display if you want to later on. So, who were these amazing honorary librarians, and why did they volunteer? Because this is an unpaid voluntary position. The desperate challenges of the First World War had ended just 7 years previously. Most people now wanted a land fit for heroes, of course, which included education opportunities. Libraries was a small partial solution and a chance to contribute to and take control of something brand new, something positive in communities. Generally, it was people and organisations who stepped forward to help the war effort, who repeated this for the fledgling library service. And particularly prominent were women's organisations. A great example was Miss Gordon Liddell. Don't have a photograph of her, sadly, but she looked after the library housed near the parish church in the church room. She was originally from Surrey, and in the early 1900s, she was active in the women's suffrage movement. By 1920, she'd moved to Pulborough, became president of the WI, as well as librarian from November 1925. In the article about it on the left there's an impressive list of local organisations which could support her and the library. There was the Parish Council, the WI, Mothers Union, Girls Friendly Society, local unions, sport and social clubs. There were 13 organisations listed which supported the library. It's incredible. This is what society was like in those days. By the way, the logo, top right, was used as the sign outside each premises whenever a library was used in that building. Many teachers also came forward and were also able to offer their school as a venue for a local library. James Henry Kibblewhite is another hero of this tale, and there are photos of him on the left. Originally from Dorset, he took a job at Singleton Village School around 1902, had a spell at studying grammar, and ended up as head at Stirling Council School, now primary school, from 1919. He'd organised sports days, chestnut collections by children during the First World War, started a young farmers club. He was incredible. He becomes president of the West Sussex Teachers Association and is so admired by the County Council that he's made a special advisor to the Education Committee in the 1920s. Take another look at the article, top right. I showed this earlier, actually, with his name circled. Top marks if you spotted that Mr. Kibblewhite was among the people who approved Twort's appointment as county librarian several months before. So Kibble White was honorary librarian for several years from November 1925, the epitome of the phrase, if you want a job done well, ask a busy person. He did a great job. He's a hero of mine. As for progress with the scheme, Tort's first annual report in June 1926 confirmed that 50 libraries were operational, just 9 months after the first public meetings. And nearly 68,000 books have been issued, a really impressive start for a fledgling service run solely by our sickly, single-parent county librarian. So I've mentioned lots of villages and some towns and so on. So all large villages and towns had a public library by the summer of 1926, with one slightly large exception, Chichester. There were grumbles in the press throughout the end of 1925, through the whole of 1926, through the early part of 1927, as a lack of suitable premises delayed a library here. Finally, one was opened in the old theatre building in South Street on the 31st of October 1927. It's now, lots of you probably know it, Zizi's Restaurant. Within 8 weeks, it had 23 volunteers to run it and 600 borrowers had signed up. Thankfully, the headquarters was also now moved from cramped 46 Westgate to behind a partition in this photograph. This 1932 photo is slightly later than it's owed, about 5 years. And I believe it was taken because the library and headquarters was about to move to larger accommodation. The library going to the Buttermarket, we'll see later, in North Street, and the headquarters to premises behind the Regiment Club. It also shows a rather forbidding looking reference library beyond the wooden divider there, you can see, with a single desk there, and all eyes trained on the unfortunate researcher, I think. So for the 1930s, the theme for the 30s was to be steady but not spectacular growth for the service. More investment in staffing, but a sad event towards the end of the decade. At last, this decade saw additions to the paid staffing complement. From 1930, Port was given a qualified librarian for the first time. Hooray! Arthur Enticott from Bognor was appointed to help him run the service. And eventually, over the next 5 or 6 years, headquarters staff increased to a further 4 professionals. The minute books, top and right, have got all the details. As the popularity of libraries themselves grew in the 30s and opening hours increased, volunteers struggled to cope, especially at the 4 largest branch lines, and professionals were clearly needed. Now, first, the good news. On the left of the slide, 21-year-old Dorothy Coverdale Sharp from Manchester became the first professional librarian to work with the public in a county council library when she was appointed at Horsham in April 1931. Maybe she deserves a plaque, Russell. I don't. She was impressive and proactive, and within months, she wrote to the press, urging the public to use their library. Now the bad news. Just 2 years into her employment, Dorothy was sacked for daring to get married. That was a county council policy. Sorry, Emily, things have changed. The policy for all women employees who got married were automatically asked to leave. A sad waste of talent. On the bright side, by 1936, all 4 of the branch libraries, that is Bognor Regis, Chichester, Horsham and Shoreham, all had professionals. So there was clear progress in this decade. However, towards the end of the decade, tragedy struck. On the 1st of March 1937, Henry died at home in Bognor of pneumonia caused by his heart disease. He was aged just 48. The funeral was attended not only by colleagues right across the county council, but also by long-time mentor William Berwick Sayers, one of the giants of 20th century librarianship, and people from the wider library community too, the National Central Library and fellow county librarians. So he's clearly appreciated by so many. What was his legacy? Well, let's look at the stats there from the annual report, compared 1926 to 1936. The number of library centres had more than tripled from 50 to 170. The number of readers were up fivefold to nearly 21% of the county's population. He started a children's service for the first time at both Bognor and Horsham libraries, and that one act greatly boosted the book issues at both those places. And the number of books borrowed increased more than 12-fold. But toward have been realistic, he'd done his best, and he knew he had very limited control over what he called very great difficulties owing to insufficient accommodation and serious overcrowding at headquarters. Those who knew him, and there were some Radio Brighton interviews in 1975, described him as a determined man who tackled the daunting task of starting a library service all over West Sussex with the energy of a real pioneer. Now, Henry Kenneth Gordon Bierman, his appointment as a county librarian in June 1937 definitely brought more impetus. There he is, top left. He was from Leighton in East London and had risen to become senior assistant to the East Ham Borough Libraries. Small in stature, at 5'5", he was to become a giant in terms of achievement. Bierman reviewed the state of the service and realised how well Trort had done, but equally grasped how the service was being held back by headquarters' inadequate premises. So at one of his first meetings with a higher education subcommittee, which governed the library service, he shocked the councillors with a display of books plastered in mildew, the result of poor storage conditions. Headquarters was quickly transferred from the Regnum Club, the back of the Regnum Club, to Wren House. Here we see in the middle, now of course renamed Eads House, in West Street. And this was now free because the new county hall had just opened the year before, 1936. Bierman also understood how vital the oxygen of publicity was to keep up the pressure, to improve the service on his bosses in the education department, and particularly on county councillors, the decision makers. So in 1938, he drafted the longest newspaper article yet on the service. Here on the right. It celebrated the great strides made by the fledgling library service and was peppered with impressive statistics. The following 6 years saw the dark clouds of war and the suffering that was caused locally and worldwide. But surprisingly, there turned out to be some opportunities in this dark period. All the male senior staff at headquarters enlisted or were called up, which is really pretty incredible. County Librarian Gordon Bierman served as an instructor in the Royal Corps of Signals. Henry Rowlandson, head of the students section. Herbert Elphick, secretary, and Bert Summers, deputy county librarian, all saw active service with the Sussex Yeomanry or the militia in Europe from 1939. Stanley Scott, also mentioned here, was Chichester's librarian and was to be called up later. And Mr. Digley, a so-called van boy, joined the Navy in 1939. Sorry, no photograph of him. There were some unexpected benefits for the service as demand for books grew from residents and from evacuees. And loans rose to over £1 million by 1940 for the first time. We have a letter, top middle there, dated 19th of October 1939, in which Stanley Scott describes how his Chichester library was being swamped by evacuees, clamouring for books, and 900 had already enrolled in 6 weeks. Imagine that. You'll recall the library had moved earlier to the market house, and we see it top left, and also the interior, I believe, is from Chichester as well. A very rare interior view. Some 48 special library centres were opened, especially for the wartime, in Army, Air Force and Civil Defence units, in hospitals, in fire stations, in Women's Land Army hostels and other buildings, and many continued to offer the service after the war. Knockhundred Road, we see bottom right, was taken over as a reception centre for evacuees, and later in the war became a temporary library, becoming permanent in 1946. Sadly, we have a tragic end to the war. Chichester's librarian, Stanley Scott, after numerous attempts to enlist, was finally called up to the RAF, was trained in Canada, and then joined 57 Squadron of Bomber Command as a pilot. He was tragically killed during a mine-laying sortie over the Baltic Sea in 1944 and was buried in Poland. Now, still in the 40s, after the war, the new rural development programme led to the creation of 8 regional libraries now, which added Arundel, Crawley, Midhurst and Pulborough to the 4 largest branch libraries that we talked about earlier. Each controlled a small network, and 16 new libraries were added in the late 1940s. And we've got a couple of 2 unusual conversions pictured here. Rustington Fire Station becomes a library, as does a 17th century farmhouse in Southwick on the right. Lancing, seen here also, top middle, was another example of post-war growth. In 1932, it had just a few shelves in the parish hall. It was quite a late starter really, but having attracted well over 2,000 library users, the so-called Tin Hut was converted to a full-time branch library by 1949. So this rural development money came very handy. So by 1949, Birmingham had achieved a good deal in its first 12 years, despite the war. Now a quarter of the county's population were members, and there were now an incredible 301 libraries in the county. Even some police stations had tiny libraries. It was great looking at the records here, actually, and there are lots of records. I urge you to have a look through some of them later on after the talk. Okay, so on to the 1950s now. Our theme for the 50s is a slow post-war economic recovery. Of course, it hit everyone in all fields, really, preventing much investment in the service. But opportunities for better marketing didn't need money. And so that's where the staff really stood up and were counted. So marketing was stepped up. My favourite photographs of the children's librarian there. So more booklets and book displays in libraries were produced. More library staff gave promotional talks in village halls and schools, really, for the first time, largely. There was a lot more emphasis on story times and things like that, like we can see there. There was also a series of annual children's book weeks started in the 1950s, with the local library and schools liaising to put on book exhibitions, talks, and essay competitions. First again was Midhurst in 1951, followed by Bognor Regis in 1954, and there were several others through the 1950s. Perhaps precursors to the more recent and very successful summer reading challenges The student library at headquarters was also expanded now with specialist collections added or enlarged. With local history, music, drama, a book loan service for WEA classes and project loans to schools, and lending collections of film strips and vinyl records. All of these began in this decade. However, the most significant milestone was yet to come. It was the building of the County Council's first new purpose-built library at last. It had only taken about, well, over 30 years. Its home, now Horsham's Library's home, had been a committee room in the town hall from 1925, with 400 books in that tiny location. The WEA Hall was the next venue for it from 1928 to 34, then St Mark's Church Hall from 1934. But at last, this brand new library was opened in North Street, the 6th of May, 1957. Now, its utilitarian architecture is fair to say divided opinion. It's not the prettiest library we've ever built, sadly. But its opening was very much welcome. It had features we take for granted today, and they were innovative at the time. It was a separate children's library with mobile bookcases, so they could be rolled out of the way for story times and evening classes, plus separate room for newspapers and reference books to ensure quiet study areas. It was important politically too, because the County Council's chairman, Lieutenant Colonel Sir Herbert Shinerless, opened the building, and this was a real watershed moment. The realisation by senior people in the County Council that libraries were now very much an indispensable service at the heart of their community, which needed further investment. The end of this decade also saw the decline of the tiny village centre libraries, those 301 that I mentioned. The extract at the bottom left from the annual report in 1959-60 makes crystal clear. In 1948, they've been responsible for 40% of all the book loans, but by 1959, it was less than 15%. By 1960, the new Horsham Library had shown how purpose-built premises and professional staff made a massive difference to the quality of service. So the 60s dawned, and there was more capital and revenue funding which was made available to further professionalise the service. Initially, it was for mobile vehicles, then for brand new purpose-built libraries, which of course needed more staff. Experiments with mobiles came as early as 1949, when a new delivery van also had shelves installed. You can see them top left, just peeking out of the back of the van. And through the 50s, they tested the practicalities of letting people onto the vehicle to choose books. It seemed to work, and in 1958, the first proper mobile library, bottom left, was bought. It's based at Horsham Library. It carried 2,300 books, greatly more than offered at most village centres. The concept of mobiles replacing village library centres didn't always go down well, to say the least, and took over 15 years to implement. I actually interviewed Deputy County Librarian Norman Harris, far right there, and he told me, this was in the 1990s, I think he still felt it. He was being shouted down at public meetings regularly in all sorts of villages, with people angry at the loss of their little library. Another mobile, the large photo in the middle, was bought for use in the expanding Crawley district around 1964. And by the end of the 60s, 5 mobiles were in use, and the era of the tiny village centre libraries sadly was coming to an end. Now, hand in glove with the new mobile service, there was a hugely impressive programme of building. New libraries began to be built all over the county. And this is just an incredible decade, actually, the most impressive of all of them in many ways. Some 21 new libraries were built between 1960 and 1974. That's 3 new ones every 2 years. Hardly believable. Many used the Scholar method of building, however, popular in the 60s as a quick and affordable building method. They used standardized, prefabricated, lightweight materials. The problem with those was, yes, they were fine for a while, but poor insulation, single glazing, and other compromises meant they were to need upgrading, which has happened over time, often a couple of decades later. Ferring on the right is a classic Scholar building, which was rebuilt in 2001. So we've done quite a few of those transformations. East Preston, on the left there, and particularly Selsey, show a little bit more imagination architecturally. The decade also saw the remaining branch libraries in larger towns joining Horsham to get a new library for the first time. Crawley, designated a new town in 1948, grew rapidly through the 1950s, and the new neighbourhoods at Northgate, Three Bridges and West Green were given temporary libraries. Top left is a very rare photograph of the West Green community hut, with the library at the back behind what looks like an evening class or similar. In 1963, finally, a large central library was included in the county buildings complex. Another first was a significant business section created for the many companies in the new industrial estate, which needed good technical sources. The other large libraries, the 2 remaining, were finally given new purpose-built homes. Now, Bognor had an interesting history. Before this 1964 building was opened on the left, the library began life in the council school at Lion Street. Then from 1931 in the Bognor Water Department's old offices. Who knew there was such a thing? Number 45, London Road. Then from 1935 in Jocelyn Hansford's Gents Outfitters shop. Again in London Road. There's something about London Road here, because the new one, of course, in 1964 was opened just down the road from the Gents Outfitters where its last home was. Shoreham, on the right there, had previously been in St Mary's Hall in East Street before this new one was opened in Pond Road in 1969, right at the end of the decade, part of a complex including a health centre. However, the 60s is not quite over yet, because in this astonishingly transformative decade, Chichester got the new library Fort had been pleading for back in the 1930s. Opened by the historian Professor Asa Briggs, the 1967 library became well known in Britain and in fact around the world, not so much for its controversial round modernist design, but for its technological innovation. The labour-intensive brown issue system for controlling book loans was replaced by the first computerised library. In fact, it was the first computerised system in any UK public library. And in fact, while I was researching for this talk, I came across an IBM manual which claimed it was the world's first example of the Remington Rand photo charging computer system, which photographed in one push-button operation a record of the borrower's ticket, the book number and date on sensitised paper. So definitely a UK first. It might even be a world first. It prompted such interest that Gordon Bierman delivered a presentation to remote delegates all over the world, hosted at Brighton Dome. Closed circuit cameras in Chichester allowed delegates to view the system live in the computer room, which is bottom right. So, now, by 1969, the computerized issue discharge system was extended to the main branch libraries at Bognor, Horsham, and Shoreham. And again, this linked branch network was another UK first library service, public library service to get this. This 1970 map shows also a new regional structure being brought in, based on the libraries mentioned, plus Crawley and Midhurst. And bottom right shows just how tricky it was to transition from the old brown issue system, the old paper cards and things like that, for the old brown issue system of book control, which had to stay in place for several weeks while the transition to computer control happened. And this is Midhurst, sorry, it's a very poor photograph, Midhurst in 1988. So the 1970s, again, another transformative decade in many ways, or at least significant advances. Again, both in technology, but also in local government. In 1970, Gorman Bierman retires. He retires early, age 62, to become a full-time vicar. And in the article on the left, we see his achievements praised. In his 33 years, the number of readers increased fivefold, from 18% to 44% of the county's population. And book issues had more than quadrupled to over 3.8 million a year. Roy Hughes, in the middle there, the top, from the London Borough of Barnet. What is it about London that keeps supplying these county librarians? Roy Hughes from Barnet took over, and his first action was to bring in an independent advisor to assess the state of West Sussex Library Service. You might think they'd been doing pretty well, which they had in some ways. It praised the new building programme, of course, and the computer devices. But as this extract shows, just briefly on the right-hand side there, the range and physical condition of books was very poor. And borrowing rates by the public were correspondingly low. So he set about improving all this, Mr. Hughes, by obtaining substantial increases in the book fund over the next 20 years, and did a great job doing that, actually. Mr. Hughes, he'd always be Mr. Hughes to me because he appointed me, and I was a little scared of him, to be honest. But he did treat me very well. It was very good. Mr. Hughes built on the earlier groundbreaking IT work too. So by 1973, we had a completely integrated system. And guess what? It's another British first. We were the first computer-generated printed catalogue by a public library anywhere in the UK. He also freed us from the education department's control to become an independent service with its own committee shared with West Sussex Record Office. It meant a lot more control. So it was, again, a big thing. So as well as all this, 1974 brought about a huge change in local government reorganisation, transferring library powers from boroughs to county councils. So Littlehampton and Worthing borough libraries became part of the county service. A boundary change also saw West Sussex acquire 12 East Sussex libraries, including the large ones that we see here at East Grinstead, top right, Southwick House, a converted Victorian villa. Burgess Hill was part of the Martlets Hall complex, and that's top left. Haywards Heath was built off Boltrow Road in 1961, and this made 35 libraries in total. So a significant acquisition. The standout event in the middle of the 1970s, in 1975, was the opening of the brand new Worthing Library. It was a design inherited from the Borough Council, which immediately became the largest in West Sussex at that time. Now, Mary Wilkes, in the two photographs that you can see towards the top left there, both as a younger lady outside Wren House and then in Worthing Library in the black and white. She previously worked at the town's Old Chapel Road Library in the 1940s, became regional librarian at Shoreham, but then was transferred over to see through the opening of this library. She's fondly remembered by many people. Now, the library had unique facilities, such as a separate music library, top middle, a lecture theatre, and also a coffee bar, bottom right. And by the end of the 70s, the service employed 100 librarians among a total of 320 staff. So things have got remarkably bigger in terms of the organisation. So my final set of slides are on the 1980s and 1990s together, really. It's a sort of merged thing, because the 2 decades saw further improvement generally, but for me and other colleagues appointed during this period, new specialist posts allowed the service to develop even further. So let's have a look at special services, as they were called, certainly when I started. I know they've been renamed. Many of the brilliant village centre volunteers, even though they were disappointed to lose their libraries, actually stayed on to help the relatively new housebound reader service through the 70s and 80s, delivering books to those who couldn't get to a library. However, it wasn't a new concept. See from the article, possibly, that there was an organisation, a voluntary organisation in Arundel, the Good Companions, who started delivering books from Arundel Public Library. And there was a wonderful librarian who I knew very well. Here he is. Thanks for dropping in, Harry. He was the regional librarian for Arundel District, and he supported and encouraged them. The idea was taken up countywide, and by 1976, the library service had over 900 housebound people receiving lending books, and I believe it continues to this day. A lending service also started to 9 care homes as early as 1953, I found. And there's a couple of examples down there. Bottom right is North View. That's the old East Preston Workhouse. And next to it is Danny Mansion near Hurstby Point. Those are just 2 of them. By 1975, books were supplied to 76 care homes, 7 hospitals, and Ford Prison. And by the end of the 90s, this had increased to an incredible 300 establishments. So top marks to special services. Information services. The services begun using book collections at the pre-war student library at headquarters and were further developed after 1945 thanks to an expanded book collection, and from the 1960s, reference librarians being appointed to large town libraries too. Building on the success of Chichester computerisation through the 80s, we introduced another groundbreaking online research service for inquiries, looking for specialist books or journal articles on various subjects. The main partners were the British Library, Dial Tech, and Lockheed. The 150,000 information inquiries handled in 1975 were to increase to over 1 million by 1996-7. By the early 21st century, development of the internet and the World Wide Web, plus advances in digitization, led to a revolution in how information services are delivered. Most notably now, I'm sure Russell would will mention something about these later. Now, most notably by the e-library. I recall the first computer being delivered to my desk as though it was yesterday. It turns out to be the early 1990s or 80s. And I was thinking, what on earth do I do with that? Put it on one side for a few weeks until I learned how to deal with it. Obviously indispensable within a few months. I'll mention local studies very briefly because I'm impinging on Russell's territory here, but computerization, digitization have a massive impact on local studies. And there's just a few of the projects that I was involved in, and it was a wonderful period when scanning technology and the Heritage Lottery Fund allowed so many opportunities to develop. And we produced this West Sussex history portal with websites covering all of these periods, which you can see now. The 1990s and 2000s also saw developments and projects, often with external grants and partnerships, particularly in children's services. And again, I'm sure Russell will mention and take this forward rather more later. Here we see some early examples of story times and summer activities, all of which greatly increased through the 1980s and 90s, and were eventually to develop into a very successful annual summer reading challenge. I think I found some very early summer reading challenge type materials, Russell, by the way, when I was with the volunteers only yesterday, back in the early 1980s, believe it or not. Finally, in the 1980s and 1990s, new libraries continued to be built, amazingly. There was East Grinstead, 1984, Hurstby Point, and Horsham here. By the way, they're the Beverley sisters, for those of you who don't know, who kindly opened the library. And a completely new one was built also at Southwater in 2006, which brought our total up to 36. And many more were extended and refurbished. Now, Roy Hughes had retired in 1992, and a seamless transition occurred as his deputy, Robert Kirk, I'm delighted to say is here with us today. He was appointed and ensured standards were maintained and development continued. During these decades, the computer network was also extended to all libraries, finally completed at Wittering's Library late in 1992 under Robert's control. And here you see him in the top at the Wittering's Library. Robert also oversaw the service's 75th anniversary celebrations in the year 2000. Now, it's quite appropriate for me to finish my view of how the 20th century service evolved. How it evolved incredibly by looking briefly again at Midhurst. In the bottom right there. Now, the town where the very first library opened, if you remember, in the vicarage in 1925, they moved to a 16th century beautiful building, Knockhundred Row, the first library I ever visited, so an incredible introduction to West Sussex. Knockhundred Row was converted, as I say, towards the end of the war, was computerized in 1988, and this shows them in the middle of computerization. But in 2014, it then moved on again to become an important part of the multifunctional Grange Leisure Centre in the town. An amazing transformation for the very first county library, which summarises just what an incredible journey West Sussex County Council Library Service as a whole has been. Thank you very much for listening, and please welcome Rosalind.
Can you hear me all right? Excellent. When I agreed to go to follow Martin, I knew I was on to a loser. So I am going to change tack a little bit and adapt what Martin's structure. So you're not going to get the perfect local studies librarian researched final chapter. Instead, I confess I'm a children's librarian. So I like to tell stories through pictures. So I have got 3 slides that talk about the time that I've spent in libraries, and then 1 slide to look about what I think is coming up on the horizon. So the first slide is called Breaking Down Barriers. So I'm taking this from around about 2000, 2002, 3, when I graduated and joined the library service as a full-time librarian. Actually, Leslie, who was my boss, then did a presentation for us talking about a brand new concept or policy agenda called social inclusion, where we were talking about how could we bring hard to reach people into library services and into public services generally, and all these brand new ideas, funding and projects to try and reach out to different people. A lot of the work we did was around children and early years, but not exclusively. So that's, if you don't know, that's Pippa the dog on the top left. And that was our first library card that was designed specifically for children to make them feel a personal connection to the library service and to start that library habit at an early age. That policy coincided with us scrapping children's fines as well. So we decided that we would get rid of overdue charges for children's books that were brought back late. It was a little bit controversial, and we did hit a bump when we found that not all the books were coming back on time. So we had to find new ways of encouraging children and families to bring the books back. But it was successful, and we have grown and rapidly grown the share of children's books being borrowed from libraries. The other innovation of that time, I remember, was rhyme time. So if you haven't been to a rhyme time in a library, that's where we sing and we share nursery rhymes. We don't mind what we sound like, but we know that's the very first building blocks of speech and language development, and it's so important. So from that time, some libraries started welcoming parents with babies and toddlers, and we've now grown to over 100,000 people coming to those every year in our libraries. A lot of the work we did, those red bags at the top as well, that's a program called Book Start, where we were gifting books and learning resources to children, babies and toddlers and preschool children. It came from a project and a piece of research, which I think was undertaken in Birmingham, which showed a significant number of households with children had only 1 book in them, which was either the phone book or the Argos catalogue. So the initiative was designed to give books to every baby, and we set about doing that through libraries, working in partnership across the council. And it was a really exciting time to be involved in something brand new. We also did work with children in foster care. Again, we were given pots of money. I remember Leslie giving us a budget and telling us we could do what we thought we would inspire and encourage children in foster care to come to libraries. So I ordered some pizza for them to come to the library. And it was a bit messy, but it did work. We had fun. Not all of our work was children and young people. We also looked at that time at policies on how we could encourage people or enable people without an address, so homeless folk, to be able to use libraries as well. So we relaxed policies, and we worked across boundaries with other councils to see about people who were moving and have more transient lives. That linked us to care leavers as well, thinking about how we could give access to them for library use too. And then I think, Sue, you might have designed that poster for Silver Surfers, who's in the audience. That was one of our early pieces of work to try and reach people who found the internet terrifying. Before we even thought about digital inclusion, we were doing it in libraries. So my second reflection on the time I've spent in libraries is about even more technological change. So a lot of what Martin shared shows how libraries were at the forefront, and indeed in West Sussex, the very forefront of computerisation for libraries. And when I reflect and look at that period there, which only goes back to 2011, it doesn't feel that long ago for me either. the pace of change and how just in society that has really rapidly grown. So over that short period of time, we've seen developments around self-service, which have changed the way that we've used our library staff. It's made us able to do more activities and more events with customers, get closer to our customers. There's also been the e-library, as Martin referred to. So Martin was very modest earlier on and talked about a few local studies projects that he'd been involved in, but actually we were pivotal in a lot of innovation and digitisation that dramatically transformed how we present local studies resources to people, and we still do today. And some of that we learned from as well in how to implement our e-library. So people were foretelling the end of printed books when e-books were advented, but actually that hasn't happened. So we've seen that our book borrowing has remained constant for many years, and actually the period in the lockdown, as Martin reflected, in wartime, when people turned to books as something for their leisure activity, we found the same thing in lockdown too. So the e-library that's come along has complemented what our libraries do, but has not at all replaced the physical offer. We've also undertaken huge amounts of massive staff training to enable ourselves to be upskilled to meet our customers' needs. And that's become more and more of a challenge and more complex as the diversity of technology. It seemed a simple time when we just had computers and the internet to show people, but now there's a plethora of apps and devices and people wanting to do different things all the time. I think the greatest technological challenge for us was when we did lockdown. So at the very end, that's a picture of Louise at Littlehampton Library during lockdown, when we were trying to help people who were isolated at home and unable to use technology, but wanted to be helped, and we were able to offer over the phone help. So my third slide, almost at the end, perhaps a bit controversial, but we have over recent years brought more services under the library roof. But it's absolutely the fact that we've been able to adapt our space in our library buildings, use it differently, the changing demands for information and reference books, particularly that technology has brought, has meant we've freed up some floor space and been able to bring in other additional services. In some, as I say, in some quarters that's been controversial. People have wondered how you can marry that alongside the core library offer. But I think we've worked hard to try and always find the right links and the right connections and to make that partnership work. So some of these that I've picked, 11 of our libraries now host health visitor clinics, and they have been really fundamental in growing our rhyme time in those libraries, where we've got health visitors offering a clinic regularly, and we've also been able to encourage library membership from birth. So in lots of our libraries, we have birth and death registration appointments. That Gruffalo library card there has now replaced the Kipper library card that we had at the start of this segment. And those are being given out by our health visitors every day in all our libraries, so that babies are instantly members of the library. Other areas where we've worked with our council colleagues to see if we can bring other partner services that benefit our library customers and the communities at large, making use of new space in our libraries like that. Well, that's Storrington Library. So, on the horizon, I think Martin, you mentioned those Scola buildings, windows, and some of that has come our way in terms of thinking about the decarbonisation of our life, of our world. And that's been a big challenge for us in recent years. How do we make our libraries fit for the future? Because they are still valued community resources, and we want them to be that way for the future. So several of our libraries have had investment with solar panels, air source heat pumps, better insulation, and those things have transformed those libraries to make them now carbon net zero. And that will carry on as part of the public estate. AI is just approaching and has been implemented in parts of the council, and we're wondering what will that mean for us in libraries, change again to our role as custodians or curators of information, and how do we make sure that we keep relevant to the role that our residents need. I think there's a rediscovery of the role of trusted professionals in helping people find information, and how we will enable people to trust in these new tools that will tell us that they'll be able to present information to us in a much quicker and faster way. And that headset there is a virtual reality headset. It's something that we've just been invested in as part of our centenary celebrations for the library service. So that is another new innovation and adaptation of where we want to reach new customers who may not have found their library yet and help them discover libraries, books and reading in new ways. So this year we've got a programme all around our libraries where the virtual reality headsets will be toured and customers can come along, try one on. You'll be able to jump into a world of books. So there's 5 different stories, they're virtual reality immersive experiences. I'm not supposed to move, am I? Sorry. So that's kind of on the horizon. And I suppose the one thing I haven't put on there, I remember a librarian telling me quite a long time ago, and they're not in the room now, if you work in the county council long enough, everything comes back round again. So I haven't mentioned local government reorganisation, but I think that definitely approach you. So thank you so much for coming, and I'm handing back to you, Wendy, am I?
Thank you so much to both of you. That was just a wonderful tour de force, really, through the history of the library, taking us right from the very beginning and then right up to the present day. Have we got any questions? Whoever it is will need to come and... Alan?
Yeah. Yes, this is one for Martin. Yeah.
Hello, Alan.
Back in the 1950s and 60s, when I was a pupil at the Central Junior Boys School in Chichester, now the New Park Centre, a library was opened in the school, and it had proper card issue and stamping. Was that a county council in the city? Did you put branches on the school?
They did. I mean, they were set up right the way through the 1930s, and I believe after the war. The library service and education service were sort of hand in glove, virtually, so worked very much together. So I can't answer that specific case and say, did the public use it? I suppose I should throw it back to you. Did the public come in and use that library? Just one. Yeah. So
it was introduced about 1906.
Yes, yeah.
We ran it ourselves, but very important standard in this, but they didn't get the real librarian.
Absolutely.
So I can't remember what it said on the title sheet, whether it was West Sussex County Council.
Yes.
I can't believe the school with enough money.
No, it's definitely a joint effort between education and libraries, because yes, as I explained, libraries were beholden to the education department, really. And yeah, there was definitely a partnership that was going on there, and that carried on. So it would have been one of what they call library centres, and it could be in a village, it could be in a school, or in the war, in other military buildings, and even I found them in police stations after the war as well. They just stayed on there, so it was intriguing. So I think you're right, it was a county council library at that point. But I urge you to go and use the county record office records to find out for yourself. There are lots of them. I've got a big list if you want to see me afterwards.
I don't know where that is.
It was tricky for me to find.
Any other questions?
I'm wondering when chartered librarian and library schools were first introduced.
Okay, the question was when chartered librarians were introduced, if you like, became
professional right at the beginning of your talk.
Yes, yes.
And Marion back in the day.
That's right, Marion Frost. She definitely took library exams, so they were certainly around at that time. I know she started at Worthing Library in 1896. She was the very first librarian there. She wasn't a professional at that point, but exams were either they existed, because there were some libraries, some big city libraries, like Winchester. Winchester was the very first one, and other large cities where libraries had evolved. I can't tell you exactly when professional exams came in for librarianship, but she certainly was able to take the exams. So they were around in the later 1890s for sure. And she encouraged the staff at Worthing Library. In fact, she insisted on it. There's lots of wonderful articles. I can share any of these articles with you if you want, where she appears in women's magazines right through the Edwardian period, and especially during the First World War, where she describes her philosophy and how she encourages her colleagues to become professionals, take a pride in themselves. She was a fantastic role model for women right through that period. So I'm burbling along because I don't know exactly what the answer is, to be honest. But I urge you to ask Google or AI after this talk.
There will be a blue plaque.
Oh yes, you're quite right. Thank you. Russell has just reminded me we're going to be opening or unveiling a blue plaque celebrating Marion Frost and her connection with Worthing Library in June, is it? Yes. So there we go. There's no plaque to her, and we felt that was an oversight. So yes.
Any further questions? Have we got any?
We do. We've got a few. So I'll do the ones for Martin first, and then there are probably a couple to Russell. Did Twort live in Chichester or Bognor at the time of his death? As both locations mentioned on one of your newspaper articles. That's followed up by, if it's in Chichester, should there be a blue plaque, considering that you found it at the county council?
So question was, Henry Twort didn't quite catch.
Did he live in Chichester or Bognor at the time of his death?
Oh, right. He definitely lived in Bognor, and if I will just have a look at my notes. I'll be right back and I'll tell you exactly where he lived. I knew I should have mentioned this during the talk. Yes, he was living at Branscombe in the Glenwood estate, which I believe is certainly the roads around Glenwood Road, I believe, in central Bognor. That's where he died. He died at home there. So that answers that one. Was there another question? Sorry.
They're asking if it was in Chichester, maybe there should be a blue plaque, but as it was Bognor.
Oh,
so
no. Yes.
You mentioned that when women got married, they got the sack, and do you know when that was revoked?
That's a very good question. I honestly don't know, but the county council minutes, I guess, would have the answer. So again, I encourage you to come and use your local West Sussex radio. And I'm sure the staff can advise where to look. I hope. Sorry, I just don't know that.
No, that's great. I think the rest of the questions are probably more for Russell.
Probably the 1970s, I guess, wasn't it? Opportunities and stuff. So I'm not sure.
Okay, thanks, Martin. Okay. We've got a question about when the PCs in the library service are likely to be upgraded because they're very slow.
We are working on a project to pilot a new version of the PC with IT at some point. There is still as yet no date for a pilot test, so not yet.
Thank you. Someone's also asked, no one's mentioned book clubs. Are there any which are run by the library service?
There are, yeah. So if you visit the library website, you can see all the events and activities either by the library, so you can have a look if you're interested in a specific library, or you can limit and filter the search by the type of activity. So you can look at book groups, reading groups, we call them, and that will then show all of the ones so you can see them across the county.
Thank you. And then we have a couple of questions about how, well, so you said you don't want to speculate. Are there any ways you, how do you anticipate devolution might affect the county council's library service?
It will change. I think Martin's presentation and the 100 years that we've been through shows that incrementally there's always change. So I think we'll anticipate further change. I think it will offer opportunities for us to think about how services, library services and other services that are currently delivered by district or borough councils work together better in a unitary form. And lots of opportunity, I think, for us to think more. The things that I was reflecting on in my little segment at the very end were really about how we've even more increasingly become targeted in trying to reach those people who we think we can have the maximum benefit with. And I think that's what we're motivated to do. So any kind of change and opportunities to do that, to reach those groups that maybe don't make the best use of their library yet, or where we can have a really impactful change in their lives, we'll try to do that.
Sounds really positive. I think then there are a couple of questions about whether libraries have been affected by the current economic climate. And someone similarly saying many local authorities have had to cut back severely on library services, and how are we placed in West Sussex? So that kind of economic challenge.
Okay, so I do feel I was going to say I think I was already daunted to follow Martin, and then I arrived and saw who else was in the room. So we definitely enabled, those of us that are here right now working in the service feel like we're standing on the shoulders of giants, people who've given us a really great library service. I think some of the things I pointed out, particularly around how we've used technology, implementing self-service has made us be really efficient. So we have got fewer staff running the same number of libraries. We have maintained all of our libraries. They're all open Monday to Saturday. And a lot of that is to do with technology and technological change. We have worked ever more closely with other library authorities around the country. So I think we're now up to 40 or 50 of us that buy our books together to secure really, really significant discounts. Again, building on work that people have done in previous decades. So undoubtedly, the economic conditions challenge us because we're a public service, just like they do every other bit of the public estate. But I think we get up every day to do the best we can and to keep helping people that need us.
Thank you both. I think that was I think that's everything. And there are some very positive comments about thank you both for the talks.
So just a final thank you to both of you. It's been a wonderful evening. It's not over yet, so do have teas and coffees and go and look at some of the documents. And thank you very much for joining us in what has been a really, really good evening. Thank you.